2 days. That's how long it took. Chastity Decker had just moved her tiny home, a real, professionally built, 252-square-foot house on wheels, onto a friend's private property. She'd signed a lease. She was paying rent. Everything about it felt legal, because in every way that mattered to her, it was hers, parked on land she had permission to use. 2 days later, a code enforcement officer knocked on the door and told her she had 10 days to leave. Not because her home was unsafe, not because it was ugly or falling apart or bothering anyone in any way you could point to, because of a single word buried in the city ordinance, the word wheels. And what happened after that knock turned into a multi-year legal fight that's still shaping how tiny houses get treated across the entire country in 2026. Stick with me to the very end, because this story has a twist about who actually gets protected by the law, and it might not be the person you're rooting for. Before we get into what happened to Chastity, if you care about housing, property rights, or just want to see how the tiny house movement is actually being fought over in real courtrooms, hit subscribe right now, because this is exactly the kind of real story we dig into every week. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with the facts, because this is a real, extensively documented case, not a rumor. In June of 2022, Chastity Decker moved back to Idaho's Treasure Valley, the Boise area, after living in Nevada. Like a lot of people in a region where housing prices had climbed sharply, she found a workaround. Buy a well-built tiny home on wheels instead of trying to compete for a traditional house she couldn't afford. She arranged to park in the side yard of a homeowner named Robert Calical on a residential street in Meridian, Idaho, agreeing to pay him roughly $600 a month in rent. 2 days after she moved in, a Meridian code enforcement officer showed up. He told her that under the city's current code, living full-time in a home on wheels, even on private property, even with the landowner's full permission, was against the law. Meridian's ordinance classified tiny homes on wheels the same way it classified RVs, and city code restricted where and how RVs could be used as a residence. She was given 10 days to move out or stop living in the home. A local paper, the Idaho Statesman, picked up her story. After that coverage, the city extended her deadline. But extending a deadline doesn't create somewhere to actually go. She couldn't find an RV park in the area with an open spot, and many of the parks that did exist didn't even allow tiny homes in the first place. On August 1st, 2022, with nowhere left to legally place her own home, Chastity Decker was effectively evicted from a house she owned outright. She spent the following weeks couch surfing with friends, along with her dog and her cat, while her actual home sat parked, empty, on Calical's property, because moving it required somewhere else to go that didn't exist. "I own a home, and I am homeless," she told a reporter at the time. That line is what made this story spread far beyond Idaho. Now, it's worth being fair to the other side of this, because the city of Meridian wasn't acting completely out of nowhere. According to court records, the investigation into Decker's tiny home started after a neighbor called the Meridian Police Department to ask whether it was legal for someone to be living in a vehicle on that property. The city's ordinance had actually been amended back in 2019 to specifically fold tiny homes into the legal definition of an RV, and city attorneys later argued in court that this classification served legitimate purposes, including concerns about how an additional full-time residence on a single-family lot could affect water and sewer service capacity. Decker's legal team, from a nonprofit law firm called the Institute for Justice, pushed back hard on that reasoning. They pointed out that within 1,500 feet of Decker's tiny home, there were 13 other RVs or trailers being used as residences that the city wasn't enforcing against at all. Her lawyers also argued that when a Meridian official was asked directly why Decker and Calical were being pursued so aggressively, while similar situations nearby were ignored, the code enforcement officer allegedly pointed out that both Calical and Decker were new arrivals. Calical from California, Decker having just moved back from Nevada. That detail is what turned this from a straightforward zoning dispute into a full constitutional lawsuit. Decker's case argued not just that the underlying ban was unconstitutional under the Idaho Constitution, but that the way it was being enforced against her, specifically, was arbitrary, and that Meridian actually escalated its enforcement against her, hitting her with new parking violation citations, right after the negative local news coverage. Her lawyers framed that as retaliation for exercising her free speech rights by talking to the press. What followed was one of the longer, more closely watched tiny house legal battles in the country. And it's worth walking through because of how much back and forth actually happened. Decker sued the city in August of 2022, her very first request, a preliminary injunction that would let her move back into her own tiny home while the lawsuit played out, was denied. That's an important detail people often miss. Even filing the lawsuit didn't get her home back. She stayed displaced for the entire multi-year fight. In early 2023, the city tried to get the entire case thrown out before it even reached a real hearing, filing what's called a motion to dismiss. The judge denied that motion, letting Decker's case move forward, a genuine early win, since courts frequently side with cities on zoning questions almost by default. Then in November of 2022 and again through 2023, both sides argued over what parts of Idaho's constitution actually applied here, including her free speech retaliation claim, which the judge allowed to proceed alongside her core property rights argument. By March of 2024, the presiding judge, Jason Scott, ruled that neither side had done enough to win the case outright before trial, and scheduled a bench trial, meaning the judge himself, not a jury, would decide the outcome for early April. That trial was originally budgeted for 3 days. It ended up running 6, largely because of how much evidence and testimony both sides brought forward about whether the city's ordinance genuinely served a health and safety purpose, or whether, as Decker's lawyers argued, it was simply an outdated rule being applied without any real justification. Then, on July 23, 2024, Judge Scott issued his ruling. And here's the twist I promised you at the top. It wasn't really about whether tiny homes are safe or whether the city's original reasoning held up. The case turned on a much narrower, more technical issue. Meridian's code required that if a property has a secondary dwelling unit, the same person has to own both the primary home and the secondary unit. Because Robert Calical owned the land in the main house, but Chastity Decker owned the tiny home sitting on it, the judge found their arrangement didn't qualify for a permit under that rule in the first place, which made the broader constitutional questions the case was actually about, in the judge's view, moot. Decker lost. I'm devastated that, after waiting 2 years, I won't be able to move back into my tiny home, she said afterward. Her legal team signaled they intended to seek review, with the possibility of taking the case to the Idaho Supreme Court. As of the most recent reporting available, that's where the case stood, a devastating loss on a technicality, with an appeal on the table, but no final word yet on where the Idaho Supreme Court will land. If there's been a ruling since, I genuinely encourage you to search for the latest, because this is exactly the kind of case that can shift quickly. It's worth sitting with how strange that outcome actually is. Meridian's own court filings, according to reporting on the case, conceded that Decker's home was safe, inside and out. Its construction, fixtures, and appliances were comparable to a traditional, stick-built home, with the only real differences being that it sat on a chassis and connected to utilities through above-ground, flexible lines instead of buried pipe. The city never argued the home itself was dangerous. It argued a permit technicality, and that technicality was enough to end a 2-year fight over someone's actual, physical home. To understand why a case like this can turn on something as narrow as a permit ownership rule, it helps to know a little bit about where these ordinances actually come from, because almost none of them were written with modern tiny houses in mind. Most zoning and building codes in the U.S. are decades old, built around a simple assumption. A home is either a permanent, foundation-built structure, or it's a vehicle, something meant for camping or travel, not full-time living. For a long time, there was no real middle category. So when tiny houses on wheels started becoming genuinely popular roughly a decade ago, cities mostly did what Meridian did back in 2019. They slotted the new thing into the closest existing legal box, which was almost always recreational vehicle, because that box already came with rules about where RVs could and couldn't be lived in full-time. There's been some genuine reform. Appendix Q, a code addendum some states and cities have adopted, specifically allows foundation-built tiny homes between 120 and 400 square feet to use loft and staircase designs that standard residential codes would otherwise forbid, recognizing that a normal staircase simply doesn't fit in a genuinely tiny footprint. But Appendix Q, where it's been adopted, generally applies to homes on a permanent foundation. It doesn't touch the wheels versus foundation problem at the center of Decker's case, because a home on wheels isn't asking to meet residential building code in the first place. It's asking to be recognized as a legitimate place to live at all, under a completely different legal category. That's really the gap this whole story lives inside. The codes have started catching up to tiny homes that don't move. They still haven't meaningfully caught up to the ones that can. Here's why this case matters even if you'll never set foot in Meridian, Idaho, because the exact same argument is playing out city by city all over the country right now. In Toronto, a man named Ryan Donnet had been building small, wheeled emergency shelters for unhoused people, complete with smoke detectors and fire extinguishers, and giving them out for free. In early 2025, the city sent him a cease and desist letter, telling him the structures were unlawfully occupying city property, even while acknowledging in writing that he was acting with good intentions. In West Nipissing, in northern Ontario, a resident named Ridge built himself a small home and, as of early 2026, was facing a possible eviction order over building code deficiencies he disputes, including insulation and foundation requirements that were never designed with a genuinely tiny, owner-built structure in mind. And this tension isn't limited to individual homeowners. Down in San Diego, entire tiny home villages built specifically to house homeless residents have run into the same wall. Zoning rules and neighborhood opposition slowing down projects that cities themselves often officially support, according to reporting from earlier this summer. What ties all of these together is the same underlying pattern. Tiny homes are almost always legal to build. The fight is almost never about whether you're allowed to construct one. It's about whether you're allowed to actually live in it, where you've put it. And that second question gets decided by hyperlocal zoning rules that can flip completely from one city block to the next. So is the tide actually turning, or are cities still mostly saying no? Honestly, it's a genuine split, and both sides of that split are real in 2026. On the welcoming side, California's SB 1211, which took effect in 2025, expanded accessory dwelling unit rights, including allowing more ADUs per lot and more flexible rental terms. Maryland passed its own Accessory Dwelling Units Act in 2025 to encourage ADU development statewide. New York City finalized zoning reforms under its City of Yes housing initiative that now allow tiny homes as backyard accessory units. A change city officials estimated could eventually add tens of thousands of legal backyard units. And in September of 2025, San Diego County issued a formal determination confirming that tiny homes on wheels can legally qualify as dwellings under the county's zoning ordinance, as long as they meet specific park model construction standards. On the restrictive side, the core legal distinction that tripped up Chastity Decker hasn't gone anywhere. Homes on a permanent foundation are generally treated as real estate, real property, with a much clearer legal path to full-time living. Homes on wheels are still, in most places, treated as personal property, legally closer to an RV than to a house, which means they can usually only be used as a residence inside a licensed RV park, not on an ordinary residential lot, no matter how well built or how permanent that home actually feels to the person living in it. That single distinction, wheels versus foundation, is really the fault line running underneath almost every one of these fights in Idaho, in Ontario, in San Diego, and in plenty of cities you've never even heard about yet. And the state-by-state picture in 2026 really is a patchwork, not a trend in one clear direction. Texas has emerged as one of the most tiny house-friendly states in the country, with many rural counties enforcing almost no zoning at all, and cities like Austin officially recognizing tiny homes as legal dwellings outright. Oregon and Colorado have both leaned into expanding ADU rules in ways that make room for smaller housing. But drive into a neighboring county in almost any of those same states, and you can find completely different rules because, and this is really the through line of this entire video, zoning in the United States is enforced hyperlocally. Two towns 20 minutes apart can have entirely opposite answers to the exact same question. Is it legal to live in this home? That's not a bug lawmakers are unaware of. It's just how zoning has always worked in this country, city by city, county by county. And it's exactly why a story like Chastity Decker's can happen in one Idaho suburb, while a few states over, someone with a nearly identical tiny home is living in it completely legally, without a single code enforcement visit. So, was Chastity Decker's tiny home actually banned? In the most literal, honest sense, yes. Not because of anything wrong with the home itself, but because of a single technical wrinkle in a permit requirement that made her entire constitutional case, in the judge's eyes, beside the point. She spent over 2 years fighting a city that fully acknowledged her home was safe, well-built, and no different in any meaningful way from the house sitting right next to it. And she still lost, at least for now. That's the honest, uncomfortable core of this story. The tiny house movement isn't really being stopped by safety concerns or by the homes themselves falling short. It's being slowed down by a patchwork of decades-old zoning definitions that were written before anyone imagined a fully finished, code-compliant home could legally sit on a trailer. If you want to see how other tiny house owners have actually managed to win these fights, and a few places that got it right the first time, that's exactly what we're covering next, so stay subscribed and keep your notifications on. Thanks for sticking with this one all the way through. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, do you think a city should be able to ban someone from living in a safe, fully built home just because it happens to sit on wheels? See you in the next one.